name is Ethan. And before she entered my life, my world was a canvas painted in muted tones. I lived in a quiet, somewhat isolated town nestled deep in the wooded hills of rural New England. It was the kind of place where old stone walls snake through forgotten forests and whispers of colonial-era disappearances still occasionally surfaced in local folklore. My days were a predictable rhythm of work, solitary walks, and evenings spent with books. There was a subtle ennui, a quiet yearning for something more, a vague sense that life held a deeper, unexplored current. This ordinary existence, however unremarkable it seemed then, was the bedrock of my reality, a stark contrast to the maelstrom that would soon consume me, intensifying the terror that followed. The first time I saw Serafina, it was at an antique bookstore tucked away on a dusty side street, smelling of aged paper and forgotten histories. She stood by a sun-dappled window, her silhouette framed by the light, and it felt less like a chance encounter and more like an inevitable collision. Her beauty was breathtaking, almost unnerving in its perfection. A striking dark-haired woman with eyes that held the depth of ancient forests and the glint of polished obsidian. There was an enigmatic stillness about her, a poise that transcended mere grace. I felt an immediate, inexplicable pull, a magnetic force that bypassed all logic and reason. It was an infatuation so intense, so consuming, that it eclipsed any fleeting sense of unease, laying the groundwork for a forbidden attachment that would defy the boundaries of the known world. I remember dismissing the faint, almost imperceptible oddities I noticed that day, the way her gaze seemed to penetrate rather than merely observe, or the curious, almost reptilian flicker in her eyes when she smiled. I attributed them to her unique charm, to the heightened state of my own emotions, or simply to the play of a light. This willingness to overlook the unsettling, to rationalize away the peculiar, was the first step in a profound self-deception. Her allure acted as a potent psychological weapon, blinding me to the subtle warnings and making me a willing participant in my own entrapment. This initial blindness, fueled by an overwhelming desire, was a crucial precursor to the psychological unraveling that would follow, making my narration inherently unreliable from the very beginning. Our relationship blossomed with a speed that in retrospect should have been alarming. I became utterly consumed by Serafina. My usual routines, my friends, my responsibilities, they all faded into a hazy background. She was my muse, my enigma, a woman who seemed to understand the unspoken depths of my soul. This intense, almost obsessive emotional entanglement mirrored the themes of forbidden love often found in supernatural narratives, and it served to isolate me from my former life, making me increasingly dependent on her presence. Yet beneath the intoxicating surface of our romance, subtle, unsettling anomalies began to surface. They were minor at first, easily dismissed as quirks of an old house or tricks of my own mind. A sudden, inexplicable chill would sweep through a warm room when she entered, leaving goosebumps on my arms. A faint, musky, almost earthy scent, like damp soil or decaying leaves, would sometimes waft from her, only to dissipate before I could properly identify it. Objects in her apartment would subtly shift position when my gaze drifted, only to be back in place when I looked again. My phone would occasionally glitch or lose signal inexplicably when she was near, its screen flickering with distorted images. These were the initial creeping intrusions of the paranormal, defying any logical explanations I could conjure. My senses, once reliable, began to play tricks on me. After we kissed, I sometimes detected a faint metallic taste, like old copper or iron, that lingered on my tongue. In moments of intimacy, I could almost swear I heard a faint, dry, rustling sound, like scales rubbing together, beneath the soft fabric of her clothes. Serafina herself exhibited peculiar habits. She seemed to possess an aversion to strong sunlight, preferring the soft glow of dusk or the muted light of her heavily curtained apartment. She had an uncanny stillness about her, capable of remaining motionless for unnerving lengths of time, and her skin, though soft, often felt unusually cool to the touch. I never once saw her truly sleep, only enter a trance-like state that was more disconcerting than restful. These details, though subtle, were persistent, hinting at a non-human nature, a creature that operated by different rules. Serafina also had a habit of making cryptic remarks, profound statements that hinted at a hidden past or an ancient nature. She would speak of the passage of ages, the cyclical nature of existence, or the futility of human ambition, with a knowing glint in her eyes. I initially interpreted these as poetic musings, the profound observations of a uniquely insightful woman. I dismissed their literal implications. too enamored to consider the possibility that she was speaking from an actual ancient perspective, from a life that had spanned centuries. She might mention old ways or ancient pacts with a casualness that suggested deep personal familiarity, referencing the deep roots of Negan folklore and ancient traditions and divine connections, a world far removed from my own. My internal monologue during these moments was a flurry of rationalizations, often tinged with a self-deprecating humor about my own romanticism, further solidifying my unreliable perception and allowing the mounting psychological tension to build unnoticed. The gradual infiltration of these unsettling anomalies was a slow, insidious erosion of my reality. Instead of immediate, overt horror, the layering of these strange events allowed a deeper, more pervasive psychological dread to take root. My initial dismissal and attempts to rationalize these occurrences were not merely passive reactions, they were crucial steps in my descent into a warped perception. This self-deception, fueled by my overwhelming infatuation, was a critical psychological process. It wasn't just that strange things were happening, it was that I actively chose to explain them away, making me complicit in my own growing entrapment. For an outside observer, the impending danger would have been clear, but I, the protagonist, remained tragically, willfully blind. Seraphina's cryptic remarks and peculiar habits were not random eccentricities. They were calculated moves by an ancient, intelligent being. Female king cobras are renowned for their strategic hunting and their ability to remember surroundings and even their handlers. Nagin lore, too, is replete with tales of cunning, manipulation, and revenge. Seraphina's actions were the deliberate maneuvers of a being with an ancient intellect, testing my boundaries, subtly hinting at her immense power, or simply indulging her true nature without fully revealing her hand. This manipulation, a direct consequence of her profound intelligence and predatory instincts, served to isolate me, making me more dependent on her and less likely to trust my own perceptions or external reality. She was a trickster, a temptress, a dangerous and seductive force, slowly tightening her coils around my very mind. The subtle anomalies soon escalated into undeniable, aggressive supernatural occurrences. My beloved golden retriever Buster, a creature of boundless affection and loyalty, began to react with extreme, uncharacteristic fear whenever Seraphina was near. He would cower, whimpering, his fur bristling, sometimes even letting out a low, guttural growl I'd never heard from him before. He would actively flee the room if she entered, seeking refuge under furniture or behind locked doors. It was as if he sensed a primal terror that my human mind refused to acknowledge. My electronic devices didn't just malfunction. They actively displayed distorted images of writhing forms or emitted chilling, guttural hisses that seemed to emanate from nowhere. Then came the accidents. A nosy neighbor who had once questioned Seraphina's late-night comings and goings suffered a sudden, inexplicable illness that left him bedridden, his skin mottled with strange, scale-like rashes. A former colleague who had tried to warn me about my growing isolation experienced a series of bizarre misfortunes, culminating in his business collapsing overnight and his car inexplicably veering off a winding road, leaving him with a broken neck. There was no logical connection, no direct evidence, but a chilling pattern began to emerge, a subtle, unexplainable signature of something malevolent at work. The turning point, the true crossing of the threshold into horror, came one moonless night. I walked into the living room, drawn by a faint shimmering light, and saw her. Seraphina stood bathed in an eerie luminescence, her back to me. As I called her name, she turned, and for a horrifying, agonizing second, I saw it. Not the beautiful woman I loved, but a monstrous, scaled form. Her skin seemed to ripple, her limbs elongate, and her eyes, those deep, ancient eyes, glowed with a predatory, serpentine intensity. A massive, hooded head, far too large for a human, crowned her shoulders, and a long, forked tongue flickered from her mouth. The vision lasted only an instant, replaced by her familiar, alluring face, but the image was seared into my mind. It was a definitive, terrifying revelation of her true serpentine form, and the immense power she wielded. This was my crossing the threshold moment, where I fully entered a world beyond human comprehension.
The shock of her cruelty followed swiftly. I had always perceived her as enigmatic, perhaps even dangerous, but not truly malevolent. Yet, in the aftermath of that terrifying glimpse, she revealed a casual disregard for human life that chilled me to the bone. She spoke of past obstacles that had simply vanished, of unruly elements that had been cleansed from her path, her tone devoid of remorse, almost clinical. Female king cobras are known to be extremely violent during nesting, and more perilous than their male counterparts. And noggins in folklore are often depicted as vengeful and capable of multiple murders. Her cruelty was not a choice, but an inherent aspect of her ancient, predatory nature. A primal force operating outside the bounds of human morality. It was not mere human sadism, but something ancient, incomprehensible, and terrifyingly efficient. The seeds of doubt, paranoia, and fear, once subtly planted, now took root and began to consume me. My perception of reality was irrevocably skewed. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every sound held a hidden menace. I became deeply paranoid, constantly searching for signs of her true nature, questioning everything I saw and heard. The fear of the unknown became a living nightmare, as the world I knew unraveled around me. My intense love for Seraphina, once a source of joy, now battled with an overwhelming terror, creating an immense internal conflict and psychological distress. I was fully aware of the monster in my life, yet my emotional entanglement made escape an agonizing, almost impossible prospect. The erosion of my sanity, experienced through the lens of my own unreliable narration, mirrored the supernatural reality unfolding around me. The escalation from subtle anomalies to undeniable paranormal events directly challenged my grip on reality. My initial attempts to rationalize everything gave way to a profound paranoia. This wasn't just a plot device. It was the very essence of the psychological horror I was living. I was experiencing my descent into madness alongside the reader, constantly questioning what was real and what was delusion, making the horror internal and visceral. My unreliability wasn't about me lying, but about my perception being warped by the supernatural, blurring the lines between external threat and internal breakdown.
Seraphina's cruelty was not simply a character trait, it was a manifestation of her ancient primal power. The prompt emphasized her cruel nature, and the research confirmed that female king cobras are inherently aggressive, especially when protecting their nests, and noggins are often vengeful. This elevated the horror from mere human sadism to something ancient, reptilian, and incomprehensible. Her malevolence was tied to her territorial instincts and a history of revenge, giving it a mythological justification that made it even more chilling because it operated outside conventional human morality. The horror was amplified by the realization that her cruelty was not a choice, but an intrinsic, terrifying part of her ancient being. After with the veil lifted, Seraphina began to use her shape-shifting abilities with increasing frequency and overt malevolence. She could transform into any living thing she desired, not just the beautiful woman I had fallen for. I would catch glimpses of her as a sleek black cat, observing me from the shadows, its eyes glowing with an unnatural green light, or a large predatory bird circling my house, its eyes unnervingly intelligent, casting a shadow that felt like a physical weight. Sometimes, in moments of rage or to eliminate an obstacle, her transformations were grotesque, hybrid forms, a woman with a serpentine lower body, scales shimmering under her skin, or a face that stretched and distorted into a reptilian muzzle, fangs glinting in the dim light. The sheer horror of these shifts, the way her human form seemed to melt and reform, was a constant assault on my senses, leaving me gasping for air, my stomach churning with nausea. Adafter some clothes live, Sun Sanga's Catastone, her ancient intelligence and cunning were now fully deployed to manipulate me and my environment. She systematically isolated me, subtly severing my ties to the outside world. Phone calls dropped, emails went unanswered, and friends who tried to visit found themselves inexplicably turned away by a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread, or suddenly too busy with fabricated emergencies. She actively turned my few remaining acquaintances against me, whispering insidious lies, sowing discord with a precision that only centuries of observation could perfect. I overheard snippets of conversations, distorted and venomous, that could only have come from her, twisting my words, painting me as unstable and dangerous. I became a prisoner, not just in my home but within the confines of my own mind, the walls of my sanity crumbling around me. My psychological torment became a living hell.
Vivid, disturbing hallucinations bled into reality. I saw snakes coiling in the corners of my vision, their scales glistening, their forked tongues flickering. I heard their hisses in the rustle of leaves outside, in the creak of the old house, in the very silence of the night. I felt the cold, dry brush of scales against my skin when nothing was there. A phantom touch that made me jump and scream. Nightmares, indistinguishable from waking life, plagued my sleep, filled with images of her true form, of venom dripping, of my own slow, agonizing transformation into something reptilian and cold. My perception of reality was shattered, and I struggled desperately to distinguish truth from delusion. The core horror of my psychological breakdown. My friends and family, when they managed to reach me, grew genuinely concerned by my erratic behavior and increasing isolation. But I pushed them away, either due to Serafina's direct manipulation, my own deepening paranoia, or a warped sense of loyalty that had twisted into a terrifying Stockholm syndrome. The forbidden love I once felt had fully transformed into a toxic codependence. I was utterly terrified of her, yet psychologically incapable of leaving. I even began to exhibit some of her cruel tendencies, a chilling transformation of my own. I found myself becoming colder, more detached, capable of a callousness I never thought possible, a descent into a monstrous, subhuman state, mirroring the fate of characters in other horror narratives. I would snap at strangers, feel a perverse satisfaction in others' misfortunes, and a chilling apathy towards suffering. It was as if her venom was slowly seeping into my very soul. The terrifying realization of the depth of her cruelty and the danger I was in slowly solidified. Through fragmented visions that felt like shared memories, or perhaps through her own chilling confessions during moments of twisted intimacy, I uncovered glimpses of Serafina's ancient, horrifying past. A history of manipulation, destruction, and utter disregard for human life, spanning centuries. She spoke of civilizations she had witnessed rise and fall, of countless lives she had intertwined with and then discarded, all with the detached air of an apex predator. This revelation directly linked to her 100-year age and the accumulated cruelty that defined her. I realized I was not just in love with a dangerous woman, but with an ancient predatory entity, a shadow archetype that reflected my own deepest fears and vulnerabilities. I, the hero of my own story, was now fully immersed in the ordeal, facing a crisis that threatened my very being, not just my physical life, but my soul, my sanity. In my desperate, fragmented research, I stumbled upon mentions of the Nagmani, a priceless gem in Indian folklore said to be the source of a Nagin's power, and also their potential demise if separated from it. This piece of lore, a sliver of hope in my suffocating terror, became a desperate, slim objective. It represented a potential tool, a way to sever her connection to her power, or at least a strategic layer to my madness. I learned that such beings might be vulnerable during specific times, like certain lunar cycles, or after mating. There were whispers of a physical tell, a subtle imperfection she couldn't always hide, even in human form, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer around her eyes, or a momentary stiffness in her movements. This knowledge, however terrifying, offered a desperate, strategic glimmer in my deteriorating mental state. The Nagmani was not just a magical gem, it was a symbolic anchor for Serafina's power and a crucial vulnerability. Its existence created a tangible objective for me, even if my pursuit was clouded by madness. It introduced a reward archetype, in the form of knowledge or an item that could potentially help, even if the path to it was perilous. Ora Walides, Madness, Impast, Allos Impasse Simplis, and all those. Serafina's contributed determined overturns, Madness Implis. These are the things a coiled mean yours university attacks to it. And with his fast, Aurelius sun gods feached of, whilst he may came, as surprising. I made med, the Nogmani mar in fact so medmis, we, madness engage myself, madness impulliums, we made more people, with a feature of dogs. There is not mating may came in madness in players, there always no simpty virtual the material screeners together, and there as my professional and our formans. That's not mating in the antipon letter, with their agencies universities, most of your scene, arrived to server and using usuals eyes many fees, made me say, 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 made me say. Driven to the absolute brink of madness, fueled by the terrifying knowledge of the Nogmani and the slim hope it offered, I made my move. It was a desperate, ill-conceived attempt to escape, to expose Serafina, or to directly confront her, armed with the knowledge of her vulnerability. This was my final, desperate test, the climax of my horrifying journey.
Confrontation was not a straightforward physical battle, but a complex psychological and supernatural struggle. I tried to sever her connection to the Nogmani, a desperate gamble to weaken her power. I remember lunging for a glinting object on her mantelpiece, a small, intricately carved jade serpent that I had always dismissed as a mere trinket, but now, in my madness, believed to be the Nogmani itself. As my fingers brushed against it, a searing pain shot through my arm as if I had touched a live wire. In response, Serafina unleashed her full, unbridled power. The room around us seemed to contort, shadows deepening and stretching into monstrous forms that writhed on the walls. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and something indescribably ancient and foul, like stagnant water and decaying flesh. She shifted, not into a beautiful woman, but into her true, terrifying King Cobra form. Massive, glistening scales, a hood flared wide, revealing eyes that burned with ancient venom and malevolence. Her body, easily 18 feet long, coiled and uncoiled with terrifying speed, filling the entire space. Her hiss was not merely sound, but a physical force that vibrated through my bones, a display of primal, predatory nature that defied all natural laws. The scene was visceral, intense, and deeply unsettling, a terrifying fusion of supernatural scares and the worst impulses of ancient reptilian malevolence. I don't remember the exact sequence of events that followed, only fragmented, nightmarish flashes, the overwhelming sense of being coiled, crushed, the burning sensation of venom, the piercing cold of her gaze, her fangs, long and needle-sharp, descended towards me, and I felt a searing pain, a burning fire spreading through my veins. My desperate attempt to exploit her vulnerability, the Nogmani, seemed to unleash something even more terrible, a primal rage that transcended even her usual cruelty. The jade serpent still clutched in my hand pulsed with a malevolent light, and I felt my own body begin to contort, my skin prickling as if scales were trying to erupt beneath the surface. My ultimate fate remains a blur, a terrifying ambiguity. I survived, physically, or so they tell me. I am here, in this sterile room, the white walls a constant reminder of the blank slate my mind has become. They call it a facility, a place for those whose realities have fractured. I am haunted by Serafina's presence, an enduring, pervasive terror that lingers in the periphery of my vision, in the faint metallic taste on my tongue, in the rustle of leaves outside my window. My reality is irrevocably shattered, and I live in perpetual paranoia, forever questioning what was real and what was a product of my descent into madness. My final words, or perhaps these very thoughts, are a testament to my shattered reality and the enduring, pervasive presence of the supernatural horror that consumed me, leaving a profound and lasting sense of dread. Maida replaced the future. The climax was not merely a monster reveal, it was the terrifying culmination of my psychological breakdown meeting the full, unbridled force of the supernatural. Serafina's definitive, terrifying display of power was perceived through my now shattered lens of reality, making the experience doubly horrifying. This fusion meant the horror was both external, the monstrous Queen Cobra, and internal, my profound madness, making it deeply effective.
The confrontation became a battle for my mind and sanity as much as my life, a hallmark of strong psychological horror. The horror was amplified by the uncertainty of whether the final events truly happened or were the ultimate delusion. Neighbor replaced the police mitted by the days that seem proud of dread. A cryptic police report final being a stage to the setup. A cryptic police report, filed months after my disappearance, mentions an unsolved case of a missing person and a series of strange, unexplained deaths in a rural New England town. The official conclusion cites unforeseen natural events and psychological distress. My doctor's clinical notes, sterile and detached, describe my irreversible psychological state, a permanent, profound paranoia, and a recurring delusion involving a beautiful woman and a serpent. They attribute it to a severe mental break, a complete detachment from reality. But sometimes, late at night, when the moon is full and the wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I hear a faint, dry rustling. And I know. She is still out there. The ancient supernatural threat is not truly gone. My unbelievable story, confined within these walls, holds a terrifying, undeniable truth, leaving a profound and lasting sense of dread long after the narrative ends.